Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's video, we're going to take an in-depth look at the recently released Saints Row the Third Remastered, and see how it compares to the original 2011 version of the game on the PC. For reference, both games are being played on the PC with their settings cranked up to the highest possible values at a native 1440p resolution, but the motion blur and film grain options will be disabled to provide cleaner images. Alright, let's kick this comparison off by taking a look at some of the character models, starting with those characters featured in the opening cinematics. Within only the first few seconds of the game starting, we can already begin to pick apart some obvious changes. The outfits for both Pierce and the gang members beating him up have all seen some slight alterations. The guy with the spiky mohawk, for example, now has a white jean vest with studs instead of just a flat blue, and his boots are now brown rather than black. But Pierce's changes are what really stand out. He almost looks like an entirely different person, with a nice increase to his poly count, along with new high-quality shaders and textures that give him a much more realistic appearance than before. It's an unexpected upgrade, especially considering the original cartoon-like graphical style that the original was aiming for, and it's a change that can be found with practically every main character in the game. Shondi, who's shown shortly after, highlights all of the same types of changes, with an alteration to the clothing material, improved facial geometry, and a new bright pink lip gloss added in. There's a ton of small changes like this that thankfully don't detract from the original style and personality of any particular character, and serve to only enhance their appearance instead. And while this is generally an improvement for most, some characters seemed better off in the original version. Like Josh, whose hair now seems to lack the same depth as it did before, probably because of the missing shadow effects. And this bank teller, whose redesign is arguably less visually interesting than what she looked like originally. The lead antagonist has probably endured some of the biggest changes, as his new facial textures and reworked facial model give him a much older appearance than what was previously suggested, and the scar below his right eye appears to be missing now. And then of course we have the player's custom avatar, who surprisingly hasn't been changed much at all. Using this same preset character model, I found that the geometry lines up almost exactly, and the only real noticeable changes have been to the textures applied to his face and clothing, the latter of which kind of looked better in the original game. This Letterman jacket, for example, used to have this shiny dark purple appearance to it, but the same color now appears more pink with the new lighting effects, and the jacket itself doesn't have the same creases that help to give it its leathery appearance. But this is only one odd case. Most outfits in the game have been improved with the latest remaster, like this Johnny Gat mascot suit, that has way more detail on the mask, and unlike the Letterman jacket from before, has a more reflective leathery appearance to it. Next, let's talk about the changes made to the game's environments. Saints Row 3 takes place in a large urban sandbox called Steelport, with lots of tall skyscrapers, residential areas, parks, and alleys to explore. It's a lot like the popular Grand Theft Auto games, only with an increased emphasis on causing extreme mayhem and goofing off with over-the-top weapons and vehicles. And the semi-destructible street corners, combined with a plentiful supply of random pedestrians and vehicles, help to make it all possible. With the remaster, Sparrowsoft made sure not to modify the flow of the game world or its popular gameplay design, and instead, we've been given a massive overhaul to practically every texture map in the city. Everything from the sidewalks, streets, and walls have all been touched up with new high-fidelity texture mapping, and a few details have been added in to enhance the appearance further. I was even surprised to find that some storefronts that were previously impossible to see into from the outside now feature full rendered interiors. Additionally, all the windows with fake parallax interiors have been reworked to help sell the illusion even more. A small detail that I'm surprised the developers even bothered to address. On top of the new high-quality textures, Sparrowsoft also reworked some of the foliage in the parks and residential areas, with increased grass density and far more complex trees that blow in the wind more believably. And then there's the draw distances, that have been increased a good amount, making it harder to spot cars and pedestrians popping in as you're speeding down the highway, an issue that was all too common in the original version. But of course, the most apparent change to the game is, without a doubt, the lighting, which has seen a massive overhaul in the remaster. Lighting in the old game has aged very poorly, with static effects that only change when activating new missions, and this weird forced volumetric effect that is combined in the graphics menu with other effects like depth of field and motion blur. With Saints Row 3 Remastered, the post-processing effects are thankfully split up into their own distinct graphical options, and the lighting itself looks beautiful now. with more impressive global illumination that bounces off of structures and character models more realistically. On top of this, there's a lot more volumetric properties to the light now. The opening mission showcases this really well, with light that now pours in through the windows and greatly adds to the look and feel of the bank heist sequence. Additionally, car headlights now properly cast light on the city streets, and even can project shadows. The only downside to the new lighting effects is the implementation of the screen space reflections. It looks great driving cars down the street, which is where you'll see the effect incorporated the most, but the surface of the water surrounding the city doesn't look quite as good as it used to, as the reflections are now solely dependent on the image displayed on the player's screen, rather than the more simplistic reflections used previously that, while only reflecting larger structures, was at least visible regardless of the angle. And then there's these weird horizontal artifacts that seem to be related directly to the screen space reflections being enabled, that hurts the otherwise great looking presentation. But still, disregarding these few issues, the lighting as a whole is a marked improvement over the often lifeless appearance of the lighting before. And to accompany the enhanced lighting are some higher quality shadows as well. Character and pedestrian shadows now appear more clearly, with less of a shimmering effect around the edges. And there's even a few new details from the environment that are now being properly projected, whereas only the basic structure was being projected before. Saints Row Remastered also incorporates a more advanced ambient occlusion that helps to emphasize the finer details throughout the game world, giving everything a more distinct depth than it ever used to. And then of course, we have effects. Saints Row is filled with all kinds of crazy effects, from dynamic weather to plenty of fire, explosions, and particles from nonsense weapons. And with the remaster, all of these effects are given a much needed tune-up. Fire, for example, is now much brighter and more colorful, with additional ember particles along with a more realistic looking smoke cloud that seems to react more naturally to environmental lighting. Grenades now feature a much brighter yellow explosive effect upon detonation, with bright yellow sparks flying in every direction to represent shrapnel. Though the original version does seem to feature additional dirt particles that help to give it a bit more complexity, and it would be nice to see this added into the remaster to help enhance the effect further. As I mentioned before, the water effects feel like a slight step back due to those distracting horizontal line artifacts caused by the screen space reflections. But it's at least worth mentioning that the fluid physics have been improved a little bit, as they seem to react a lot more to this wave runner than they used to. And then it's also worth mentioning the depth of field effect, that now seems to behave more effectively, focusing on specific objects and blurring out anything outside of the player's reticle. I personally prefer disabling this effect, as it seems a bit unnecessary, but for players that prefer this, it has been improved a great deal over the depth of field implemented in the classic version. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which version of the game do you think has the superior audio quality? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Saints Row the Third Remastered is a surprisingly well done update to this chaotic sandbox experience. This isn't just a small resolution upscale with some tweaked lighting contrast and a couple updated textures. Practically everything in the game has been upgraded, with more advanced global illumination, more detailed environments, enhanced effects, and a departure from the more cartoon-like appearance of the character models before in favor of something a bit more realistic. However, it's not perfect. The few rare bugs I encountered, along with the less impressive screen space reflections, all detract from an otherwise great-looking presentation. And considering it's been 9 years since the original game release, it would have been nice to see Sparrowsoft go the extra mile and incorporate some form of dynamic lighting, along with improvements to the actual gameplay mechanics, as the general design hasn't aged very well. But still, as far as remasters go, Saints Row the Third Remastered offers some solid enhancements, and is totally worth checking out, especially for players that missed out on it the first time around. But what do you guys think? Are you happy with the changes made to Saints Row the Third, or were you expecting more? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.